Freelancers, small business owners, consultants, and solopreneurs. Some people are just drawn to working for themselves. I'm Owen Roth. In this show, I have conversations with self-employed folks about their career journeys. Welcome to the Bossless Path podcast. And here we go. Today I'm joined by Sean Grasso, a documentary filmmaker. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So let's start at the top. What do you do for work?
I'm a cinematographer, and I'm also just generally involved in the film industry. And so I've kind of been leaning towards now directing and producing my own films. But for the past 12 years, most of my work has been specifically in cinematography. So camera operation, directing the lighting, doing that for documentaries, short films, commercial and corporate projects. I'm a freelancer, so I take work as it comes in.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of different elements of filmmaking.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing your cinematography, is that your passion? You're saying that you kind of have done other things as well.
If you ask anybody who's gotten involved in filmmaking, a lot of times there's so many roles in filmmaking itself that you have a chance to explore, especially if you went to film school, you have a chance to explore a lot of them. Like when I first started in film, I thought I wanted to direct, as most people do when they see, when you watch a movie, the person's name who you remember, other than the actors, is most likely the director, right? And there's this sort of theory and that you learn in film school called the auteur theory, that like a film is sort of the baby of the director, and they're the main artist behind everything that's sort of controlling not only the image but the making all the decisions in terms of the art of the film, the acting, and all sorts of stuff. So there was kind of that push towards directing when I first got into it, but I quickly realized that my strength is less in directing people, at least early on, and more in capturing the images themselves. And so I really leaned towards, when I started making films, just lean towards capturing images behind the camera. I did a decent amount of photography early on, and sort of realized that my strength was composing, capturing images, lighting things, and sort of communicating through the image rather than communicating directly with the crew or anything like that.
So you've sampled everything, or not everything maybe, but you've sampled a lot of things under the umbrella of filmmaking.
So I can take that back a little bit because, from 2012 to 2018, I ran a production company, which that entails, doing everything from the pre-production when you're deciding, what your film's going to be, producing, reaching out to the locations or the people involved, or if it's a documentary, the interview subjects, and then following that all the way through production and then into post-production, so the editing, that it was just me and a friend of mine who started this production company, and we kept it a small operation throughout our existence. And so that was really my opportunity to sample all the different roles and, learn how to edit and color grade and all that stuff. And then also, on the front end, learning how to produce a project. And then during production, really learning how to not only shoot, but to manage the production during that time. But as anybody who ran a production company could tell you, it's a lot of work. And even just managing the clients and stuff, it's this whole other side that is not really involved in the creative aspect of filmmaking, I should say.
It is filmmaking, but it's the hidden side, that like people don't think of.
Yeah, exactly.
Which probably is the same of any job or industry is we just think of things as, from the outside when we just think of things as one thing, but there's usually a lot underneath the surface going on. What was that like, discovering that there's other elements of filmmaking, and the soft side of things, the business side of things as well?
For filmmaking in particular, like I learned kind of all the different aspects of filmmaking in film school. And I think that wasn't as much of a surprise to me as much as what it takes to run a business, right? And like that was the bigger surprise back when, I was 22 and started this production company, and, everything from, registering with the Secretary of State, starting an LLC. So like if something were to go wrong, you're a limited liability company. And so if a client were to sue you, let's say, like, then your personal finances wouldn't be held liable. Like discovering all these things that I kind of, as a filmmaker, was like, well, I just want to make my art. Like, I don't really care about that stuff. Like, no one's going to sue me, right?
Right.
But, everybody who I was talking to at the time, who was much older and wiser than me, was just saying, no, you need to start an LLC. You need production insurance. And sort of like, I think like it was like $1 to $3 million in liability insurance. Like, let's say you're on set and a light falls on the PA's head. It's like, you want to be able to have some insurance in case something like that happens, God forbid. But so there's all these different aspects to running a production company that, like, you can sort of do everything above board and not let things slip through the cracks. And you hear these horror stories in filmmaking communities where, like, some people won't pay their taxes for, X amount of years, not even realizing that they needed to pay taxes on their freelance income. Mm-hmm. And so my business partner and I, starting this production company, were really like, I think getting sort of the push also from him to do everything as much as possible, in a professional way. And that was sort of taking us away from, taking me a little bit away from just the art I wanted to create or the films I wanted to create. But I think that's just a necessary part if you're going to do everything on your own, about running a business that is successful, and at the end of the year you're not going to get audited by the IRS, right? And so I think just mentioning part of that is, maybe one of our flaws in that production company was that we just decided to do everything ourselves, even down to those taxes. So we could have hired a CPA. And we eventually did, but the first few years, as we were getting everything, situated, we learned how to do our taxes ourselves. And, as anyone who's ever filed their taxes for, their business knows, it's not like super simple. It's not as easy as just your personal taxes.
It's intimidating. It's intimidating to, like, I don't know. I guess I'm more of on the side of the spectrum that's like risk management, like think like a little bit conservatively on like that kind of stuff. But you go into it and it's not always clear what you need to do as far as taxes and how to record stuff. And you can pay someone, and like you said, that's sound advice. But I know from personal experience, and I'm sure it's with other people's, there's always that like balancing act in your mind of like, well, it's really expensive to, if a lawyer is involved and you're getting advice there, or CPA, I mean, still costs a lot. And it's hard to sometimes bite the bullet, especially if you're trying to ease into some type of self-employment like freelancing. I think some people want to like spend the least amount of money and then work their way up. So
right. Yeah, that's definitely where we were at the beginning, especially the first couple years of our production company. We're like just mostly doing spec work. Right. For very cheap. But, that really, it did pay off in the end. So then once we were doing those bigger, client work, then, it was really, we were able to afford a CPA and offload that, so we didn't have to. But the first few years, I don't even think we, made enough to pay somebody.
Yeah, I can relate.
Yeah.
Similar story for me. Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting, I think about this a lot, like, cause, like my own path, like being interested in video, in high school and trying to dabble my feet in it. I know I was like very much of like, I wasn't ready to commit, both like mentally to what it would be on and also just like commit my life to like diving in and like starting a proper, doing business the proper way, hire lawyers and CPAs and get everything all sorted from the beginning instead of learning as you go. I didn't do it that way, and I think that's probably a similar thing that a lot of people do. And I don't know. I think it's interesting, that balance of like, well, how do you get your foot in the door? Do you just like jump off the diving board and like get loans and like, or draw some type of capital somehow to like start, whether it's in the film world or whatever, or do you just kind of like hodgepodge it along at the beginning, maybe make mistakes, do things the ways they shouldn't be done, and then make mistakes and grow? I think it's a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. But fortunately with filmmaking, I mean, you can kind of take it slow, and that technology is fairly affordable these days. You can buy a production-ready camera that can get some really good images, especially if you're open to buying used, for under $1,000 these days. Like, it's not gonna film something on a Hollywood movie set, but in terms of getting you work as videographer or some type of person that gets paid to capture images, right? Videos. The barrier to entry is pretty low these days. And so like, unlike a brick and mortar shop or something like that, all you need is a camera, a microphone, a few lenses, and, an editing system, and you can start making money off of, your tools. At the beginning of a filmmaking career, you don't really need to, compared to other businesses out there, you don't really need to make a giant investment in a bunch of equipment just to get started. It can be pretty affordable, especially if you buy used and are not looking for the latest technology, which, you don't often need.
Right. Yeah. I know, because we both work in this industry to a degree. So there's the whole, gear envy and all that, and you have to battle with, I think,
right,
some people, because it's a industry where a lot of people like yourself and me like get into it because they enjoy it, versus like, I mean, I don't want to speak for other people, but I don't think people who are like getting into accounting probably would do accounting in their free leisure time.
Sure.
Whereas, cameras are fun to play with, so people want to like, they're probably going to play with them as a hobby, and then that's what leads them, like us, to try and make it a profession as well. There's the danger of just wanting, now it's a business and I can afford it, so I'm just going to get that Alexa or what have you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
a slippery slope.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I think what was really nice when I had the production company was actually, having a second person to bounce off these ideas of like, hey, what are we renting out? What are we needing for our jobs? Like, what's going out on all these, corporate videos or commercials or documentaries we're making? And what do we need? What are the holes in our equipment list? And what can we like sell to these companies that are hiring us reasonably? And you sort of create a conversation like that around gear, that then it becomes this sort of not a personal decision anymore to say like, oh, I could also use that on, the next vacation I'm going on. I'd really like to use that lens or whatever, that kind of nixes that out of the conversation, because you're running like this business with another person. And I try to take that mentality now that I'm on my own to the gear purchases that I'm making, where it's like, you know, can I sell this on the work that I'm getting, and can this be useful for the work that I'm getting, to the point where, you know, it's not just something I want to play with. You know, I think there's just this balance of like, you have to be able to you know, use the gear and get your money back on it because you're running a business. But also you want to own stuff that's going to inspire you to keep creating, and not only fit the job, but also fit your style and whatever you're trying to do. At least as a cinematographer, that's how I look at it. But there are definitely, you know, in the higher ranges of my profession, there are people who don't own any equipment, and they just are at a level where they just rent for every job. And that's usually at the upper ranges of commercial cinematography and narrative, you know, fictional filmmaking.
And the reason because they don't own and they rent is because the gear is so pricey and the technology changes so quick?
No, that's partially it. But a big reason is because if you truly see yourself as an artist and a creator, you know, when someone comes to you, like let's say a director, and they say, "Hey, I got this movie that we're going to film, and it's based in the 70s. You know, the script's you know, based in the 70s, and we want it to look that way." Let's say you own all this, you know, really modern, high-tech camera equipment that looks very pristine and has this sort of modern look to it. It's not really going to fit that film. Yet your business interest is going to be, how can I sell this equipment to this production anyway? And so it kind of gets rid of that, where you become sort of independent of the gear, and you say for each job, well, what gear is best going to fit this project that I'm working on? So for that film in particular, you might think, oh, let me go rent these lenses that were made in the 70s so it can get that look that, you know, fits with the period. So it's this kind of like different level where you're just using the specific equipment that fits best with the particular job. Whereas when you own a bunch of gear, oftentimes you just, from a business perspective, you just want to bring the equipment you own and know best to everything you work on, which is a little limiting, especially when you get into those upper ranges.
Let's rewind, though.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Just maybe throughout the chronology of how you started. Sound like you went to film school?
Yeah. So yeah, it's I'm hesitant to call it a film school. It is essentially a film school. It's a small liberal arts college out in Forest Grove called Pacific University, and so they happen to have a film program. And I think I originally went there thinking I'd be a physics major or potentially computer science. I spent a lot of time gaming when I was like a teenager, and so I kind of just saw the transition to just like. I was interested in physics, but I was also interested in computer science, so I kind of jumped into that. And then I went to this presentation about computer scientists and what they were currently doing, alumni who graduated with a computer science degree and what they were currently doing in their careers. And so a little bit of background, I grew up in Las Vegas, and had moved to Oregon to go to college. And there was this sort of, you know, coming from a desert and moving to such a beautiful place with, you know, these, you know, volcanoes and coastal ranges and all sorts of like old growth forests and just kind of, you know, an amazing natural beauty, right? That I was experiencing as I was in college. And to go to this presentation and see these computer scientists talk about what they were currently doing, a lot of them spent 8 to 10 hours a day just right on a laptop in, you know, either a cubicle or working from home. and
Like indoor screen time.
a lot of screen time, right? And so I was coming from a place where I gamed a lot, was just into all sorts of games as a kid, and then came to Oregon and experienced this. I went backpacking for the first time, and just was on this bent of like, I have so much like outdoor time to make up for, right? And so I saw that and decided that major just wasn't for me, with, potentially having my career spending, 8 to 10 hours a day on a screen. And so I've discovered the film department. It also happened to be right around the time when Netflix was just releasing streaming content. And when they started their streaming, because it was all the DVDs back then, right?
Yeah, the pivot point.
Yeah, and I had a subscription, but I was just, at the time, Netflix didn't really have that much money to like pay for any like big budget US movies or anything like that. But what they did have were all these obscure independent and foreign films, and particularly a decent collection from France. And so I just started watching all of these films of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that essentially were like art films or sort of like, independent films that were really unique to what, Hollywood was currently doing at the time. This was around 2010, or just like anything I had been exposed to in the past. And so I got really excited by that and decided to check out the film department, and sort of went on this path of just getting more and more interested in, how to capture images, how to communicate through the art form of film, and really transitioning from seeing it as entertainment to seeing it as art, right? I think that's what film school really brought me to. So met quite a few people while I was there, but one guy in particular, Tristan, we became really good friends, and he and I decided after college to start this production company. I kind of had a knack for filming stuff, and he had directed quite a few short films while he was in school. And so we kind of paired pretty well of like, okay, I'll shoot and you direct. Mm-hmm. And that just kind of blossomed into kind of seeing what the world was like when we graduated, and seeing what the state of video production and documentary filmmaking was. We got very lucky in that there was sort of a technological revolution going on in the film industry right as I was graduating. Traditionally, digital cameras have these really small sensors that look very video-like and don't really look like filmic, or like what the average person would associate with like cinema or sort of like a movie, right? And just as we were, 2010, 2011, these larger sensor cameras, which were traditionally DSLRs, just happened to have a video feature.
I bought the Canon 5D Mark II. That's actually how I got into photography. I went backwards, starting video photography, and now I'm coming back. But they had a lot of quirks, but they were able to, if you can get this, if you can dial everything in right, you could get a fairly beautiful image on a camera like that really, could look filmic and really like bring the viewer into this sort of like cinematic world versus the traditional video look, which is so often associated with like home movies and sort of amateur video and stuff. And so we saw this opportunity to start telling stories with those cameras and upload them online. And particularly at the time, Vimeo was flourishing.
Vimeo.com is like a video hosting platform, right? I'm
equivalent of YouTube, essentially.
Yeah, and at the time they were kind of, Vimeo, if you were a filmmaker or anybody interested in video, you kind of uploaded your stuff to Vimeo because it looked a lot better than YouTube at the time. And so we started by having this idea of making short documentaries. With living in Portland, we were kind of aware of this sort of movement of people to start creating things on their own, and really a big movement of entrepreneurs themselves basically going into workshops or creating products or whatever it may be by hand. And so we saw this like really good pairing of, hey, let's tell these stories of these people creating these products as a way to, grow our filmmaking skills and create interesting videos, but also with the hope that we could sort of commercialize it in some way, right? Like make money off of it, because
this is when you were mentioning earlier spec. You're making spec work, yeah.
Right, and so we started looking for subjects. The first project we did was totally pro bono. It was on a couple who made handmade paper lanterns, which are really ornate and beautifully crafted. And we followed that process from A to Z and filmed this 3 to 5 minute documentary around their process and how they've sort of created these lanterns. That video really solidified our process and said, oh, okay, like this can be done. And so then we shopped it around to different other people saying, hey, we made this video. Would you guys want a video similar? And, a lot of people just were like, wait, how much is it going to cost? And even at the time, I think we were trying to, we were asking for maybe $1,500 for a video, which anybody in the video industry knows, like a really high quality documentary for $1,500 is a steal, right? But we were just starting, so we really needed just more, more videos that we could, kind of get in our portfolio. And we ended up finding 2 folks who were interested. One guy was a previous shoe designer for Nike, and he was using all these really interesting process, like interesting inspiration to look at how he could design shoes in a different way. And so he was using weaving and origami to sort of think about how he could make shoes with untraditional methods. And so he had a really interesting story about being involved in this innovation lab at Nike. And so he was one of those guys who, got a sweet deal for this video. And we treated...
I want to ask real quick, when you said like your $1,500 you mentioned, was that, and you said that that's a low number. Is that something you were aware at the time that it was a low number, or was that one of your learning?
So we were just covering, we were totally aware that was, obviously really low, but we were, it was also a lot of money for these people who were taking a risk on us, right? Traditionally documentary subjects are not paying for documentaries to be made on them, but because we're at this like sort of middle ground between, hey, they're going to get really great promotion from this documentary. It was before a lot of branded content. You hear this sort of that term thrown out a lot now, where companies will actually pay for documentaries to be made, and then just for their brand to be at the beginning or the end of it, right? And sort of that was kind of the approach we took. It's like, we're not selling the audience on anything. We're just telling this person's story. And through that story, people will be able to connect to what they're doing and what they're making, and hopefully you know, at some point when they're thinking about, let's say, buying shoes, or let's say transition to our other subject, buying a knife, then suddenly they'll see, they'll remember that story and maybe go and think about buying one of those products. But
you're ahead of your time as far as
it was in the air. You know, we were pulling from other things, examples that we saw online, and realized that like the traditional ways of advertising to somebody just wasn't going to work. Like if we, you know, there were so many videos we saw of like just the standard, like, you know, somebody trying to pitch you on a sale, and for at least the millennial generation, you know, that wasn't necessarily working so well. We created that documentary, and that film got really a good amount of attention online, and that was part of our process was to have a whole, I wouldn't call it a campaign, but just a strategy upon release, where when we posted the film online, we had all these different people who were in that world. So for the shoe designer, there's a whole community online interested in you know, shoes. Mm-hmm. And so we, at the time, blogs were really popular. You know, the social media has sort of taken over the blog space in a way. Mm-hmm. We would create a list of blogs that we were aware of in the shoe design space, and then when we finished the film, we'd send it off to those bloggers and you know, try to connect with them on a one-to-one level, saying like, hey, you know, we follow your blog, and like we thought this film we made might be interested to your followers or whatever. And that allowed the film to really get some traction and get out there. And then Vimeo has like a system of selecting certain projects that are uploaded to their site as staff picks. That at the time, I think currently staff picks don't, I mean, it's still a real good badge of honor, but it doesn't really get the kind of elevated traction that it once did. But at the time, you know, that staff pick really catapulted that video, that particular documentary, up to a level where we didn't even expect it to go. Shortly after that, we had calls from, you know, all sorts of corporations and companies just contacting us saying like, how did you guys do that? And could you do something similar to us? So we ended up working for Microsoft on a project, you know, a whole host of other companies, just, you know, going from two guys with just a camera and a couple other pieces of gear working out of a spare bedroom to then, you know, going to Microsoft HQ and editing in their suite on a project was, you know, at 23 years old was definitely like a lot.
Yeah. That's a pretty big jump, pretty quick. What was that like processing? Like, were you feeling like, you know, fish out of water?
A little bit, because, you know, we were filmmakers, and then we were asked to sort of like make sort of this like corporate content. And it was definitely a little bit out of our comfort zone.
They weren't saying just recreate exactly what we saw. They said
no. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, because we really hoped that was going to be the ticket where we would just make sort of a similar style documentary, but for you know, this company. But they wanted some sort of news-based content. I don't know how much. I don't remember if I signed an NDA on that or whatever.
Okay, well, yeah, we won't go.
It was never like released. It was just, but you know,
it's interesting though that they didn't like. You were on their radar because of this like very particular type of work you made.
Yeah,
and then they bring you in, but they don't want you to recreate that. They want you to do something that.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Isn't in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. Yeah, I never fully understood that, but, you know, you never know how these bigger corporations work, and, you know, what the chain of command and who's asking for certain things. So,
sure.
But yeah, it was definitely, you know, and then to kind of segue to the next film we made that was sort of even grew even bigger, we made this documentary on this guy who he spent a decent portion of his life living in Japan, and he's from Canada, and he basically studied under this Japanese bladesmith and learned, his process, and then took that to the U.S. and started, basically manufacturing blades himself, like kitchen knives and hunting knives and stuff, and really at the highest quality. So what's interesting is that, we told his story, and there's just this, like, so many people connected with it, to the point where, that, just grew our business even more, to where, like, it as well got a Vimeo staff pick, and all these people just started reaching out to us. And what helped our business a lot was that Google was doing this shift where it really prioritized video content at the time. It was at this point where the SEO world was really starting to really take off, and people were, like, really thinking about, like, how can you become that number one spot when someone searches for whatever business, they're looking for. How do you become in that first page or whatever? And so for whatever reason, because so many blogs were talking about our videos, and because they were, watched hundreds of thousands of times, when you search Portland video production for, like, I don't know, I want to say like 4 to 6 years, we were probably 4 years. We were on the first page, and sometimes even the first result.
It's a long time to be right up there with a lot of exposure.
Yeah, and so what was crazy was, like, we just got so many inquiries from that. It took off. Like, at the beginning, we were doing so many cold calls and trying to reach out to people to say, like, hey, would you want a video made by our production company, and just trying to establish, like, some base of clients. But once that video really took off, we had this consistent stream of people reaching out to us because they found our page on Google. And so that was, super great for our business, but also it started to lead to, I think, what inevitably made us not want to run the business anymore.
Oh, interesting.
Which was that we weren't controlling its destiny. The jobs that were coming in were controlling what we worked on. And so while it was great to have this idea of, like, endless clients sort of coming in and asking for work, those clients were the ones that, dictated what we were working on based on what they wanted produced, right? And so we went from
Intel job Microsoft that you mentioned earlier, that was almost like foreshadowing of what might happen and did.
Yeah, a little bit. So we, like, no longer were we seeking out, we want to make this sort of artistic documentary film on this maker and letting that drive our what we pursued. We were just reacting to the jobs that were coming in. And I think that was just, at the beginning, it was great because, we could just, we were making good money and we were, sustaining this business. And, but then after a while, it became like, when's the last time we worked on something we were actually really stoked on, or, like, really, were proud of, or wanted to put right on the front page of our website. We still put those Craftsman documentaries, those were still at the top of the work, that we considered our best, right?
Yeah, flagship portfolio pieces.
Yeah, and so as a filmmaker, suddenly I became more of this corporate, sort of commercial filmmaker that I wasn't really, I was sustaining myself, and we had this flourishing business, but I didn't really, like, feel satisfied with the kind of work that I was doing. And so we, both Tristan and I, had these friends or just, industry contacts who were more freelance and not running their own production companies, but just being hired by agencies and other production companies to fulfill a certain role in the production, whether it be cinematography, directing, or gaffing, which is running the lighting on set. And we saw that as sort of like a lot more freeing in that you only had to do that one aspect of the job, and then you could spend the rest of your time working on something that you actually cared about. And so in 2018, we both decided, Tristan and I, my business partner and I, decided to end the business and both go freelance.
Right. Yeah, going freelance really it's not the exact same as being an employee and having a job, but it kind of has a lot of the same qualities where you don't have to worry about all the other hats and running the business like you do. Like you do with it when you run your own production company, you did. And then the freelance kind of allows you to have more of like a employee type relationship with work, obviously without the job security.
Yeah, it's a balance because I think you just have I think you end up you end up thinking about work a little less because, like when I was running the production company, I was a producer, sometimes even a director, but, a cinematographer, an editor, colorist, all these different roles, and even client management, all these different roles that takes up a portion of your day, whether, you want it to or not. If you want to continue the business. So once you go freelance, it's sort of, you're able to specialize in whatever role you're focusing on. And so that allows you, to just have more time in your downtime where you're like not thinking about, oh, I need to reply to that one client or I need to get that other thing going. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's just about like scheduling the work on, for me, I decided to go freelance as a cinematographer. And so it really allowed me to focus on that craft particularly and then spend most of my time on set. And apart from, doing some location scouting or, sending emails to schedule those jobs, a lot of my work is just now only driving out to either a set or a location and filming for a day and then, handing off that footage to the company or whoever it is.
Right. To finish your career path, you ended the production company with your partner. Today's 2023, so that was about 5 years ago, it sounds like. And then you transitioned into freelance. And is that what you've been doing since then?
Yeah, pretty much. So my wife is an academic, and in 2018, when we're ending my business partner and I ended the business, she had this opportunity to move to Philadelphia to pursue a postdoc, and so to be able to start in a new market and sort of promote myself as a freelancer was a really great opportunity. So from 2018 to 2021. I freelanced as a cinematographer in Philadelphia and working, on documentaries, continuing that documentary, that passion for documentaries that I had, but then also really stepping up the level of commercial production that I was working on. So, worked for Guinness and like a different amount of pharmaceutical companies, some films for Hasbro, and so like kind of just like a mixed bag of corporate and commercial stuff.
Yeah, but big name clients.
Right. And bigger budgets and bigger crews. And I was able to work with these really seasoned gaffers, which was like, one of the best things because they're, I was 28 at the time, 29, and I'm working with these like gaffers that are edging into their 50s and like, they just have this wealth of knowledge, right? Even though technically I'm supposed to be directing them, oftentimes I'd glean all these different ways of lighting that I wasn't really exposed to before, having mostly worked in this sort of insular production company environment. So that really leveled up my skills and my ability to sort of be a competent cinematographer. Not only just shooting my own stuff, but, really being able to getting a call the day before and being able to come out and shoot something professionally, and knowing everything that goes into that. So 2021, my wife and I left Philadelphia, and partly, pandemic spurred. We were all of our families on the West Coast, and so to be out there, during lockdown and all that stuff, and really feeling that distance of being all the way across the country from everyone we know was really like, okay, even though things are really working out here in Philly for both me and her, we both thought, I think, like we could benefit personally from moving back closer to one of our families. And so roundabout, story, we took some time off and, during the pandemic. And then my wife got a job at OSU, which leads me to here where we are now in Corvallis.
Oregon State University, because there's a few OSUs out there.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And so that led us to Oregon, Corvallis, and it was an interesting decision for me because even though I kind of had a similar feeling, even though I was really happy with the quality of work that I was producing in Philadelphia, I've always kind of saw my purpose in life as just a little bit bigger than, selling products or like trying to produce commercials, right? Even though the work is great, I was always trying to strive to produce projects on the side that I was more creatively satisfied with. And so moving to a smaller market, an almost non-existent market for video production like Corvallis, it really proved to be an opportunity to explore, get back to sort of the documentary films that sort of inspired me in the first place. And so it helped that in our relationship, my wife and I have been together for 11, almost 12 years now. And
which is like the duration of your film career,
coincidentally. And so traditionally for most of our relationship, I've always been earning more of the money. And then now that we moved to Corvallis, it's kind of flipped where she's now has a great, she's an academic and has a great salary here. And so it's allowed me to just take a little bit of that burden of, earning a ton of money and kind of flip that to where, I can explore a little more and not have to hustle so hard as I was in Philadelphia. And so it's allowed me to focus more on documentaries that inspire me and the stories that I want to tell, and focus less on, really perfecting cinematography. And so that's where, as I said in the beginning, kind of dabbling in directing now. And I'm producing 2 documentaries at the moment that I'm really excited for. Just hoping that I can transition into less commercial and corporate storytelling and more of just, telling stories that really inspire me and I think need to be told.
So do you want to share what those film projects are that you mentioned?
Sure. One of the films is a short documentary, so I think it should be like 10 to 15 minutes, but you never know when you're starting to one of these projects. But it's a film about a program inside of a women's penitentiary called Coffee Creek, just outside of Portland, and it's a conservation program where these adults in custody are and I say adults in custody because that's kind of the technical term that the prison uses. There are some trans males in the prison, so to say women is kind of a little bit of a misnomer to describe all of the population there. Mm-hmm. So it's a film about these people incarcerated who are part of this program that is conserving this one endangered butterfly that only exists in like one spot in Oregon, actually 2 spots in Oregon and 1 spot in Washington, and they're very small patches of habitat. But they used to be really popular or really widespread throughout the Willamette Valley, but due to habitat loss and degradation, they've really declined in numbers. And so a few organizations in Corvallis and as well as the penitentiary saw this opportunity to sort of bring in this captive rearing program into the penitentiary and have some of the inmates basically raise the caterpillars from eggs all the way to right before they're going to turn into butterflies, and they are then released into the wild, into this habitat that they have. Mm-hmm. And then the cycle continues every year. And so I thought it'd be a great, there's sort of this like interesting thing where, a lot of prisons don't have any sort of connection to nature for the people incarcerated there. Sure. And I wanted to explore this idea of like, what would your prison experience look like if suddenly you have this sort of not only like a connection to nature, but this deep connection where you're saving an endangered species and helping repopulate them. Just sort of like there is this metaphor of transformation through the butterfly and sort of this prison experience where you hope that somebody going into prison would sort of be transformed and come out on the other side a different person. And there's this metaphor of like a butterfly sort of going into their cocoon and coming out from a caterpillar to a butterfly. Mm-hmm. But I quickly realized jumping into the project that I think reality is so much more nuanced than that. Of course. And to like sort of pigeon it into just, I got to pursue that metaphor would be do an injustice to the actual, individuals involved in their stories. And, right, of course. And so, yeah, I'm currently in production on that. So I've shot twice in the penitentiary, and I'm sort of following the natural cycle of I started early on in the little larva's life cycle, and I'm hoping to follow it all the way through to the butterfly stage, and get the actual butterflies that they are putting back into the field and seeing them actually fly around in their habitat. So that takes a whole year, but I think it'll be interesting to kind of follow that whole process, and then through that's the backdrop, and then have the stories of these incarcerated folks that are involved in the program sort of interspersed throughout, and see where that takes me. Yeah.
You said a couple projects.
Yeah.
What's the other one?
The butterfly film is the shorter project that I'm working on, and then
it sounds pretty involved.
Yeah, it is involved, but it's on this time scale where I think it's manageable for me. And then the second project that I'm working on is actually more of the bigger project that I'm putting a lot more resources into, and it's this sort of, I'll tell you where the project is now. Sure. And maybe then I can tell you how I got there. But there's a lithium mine going into this area of southeastern Oregon, and it's this interesting place where we currently the country's moving in this direction of net zero by 2050. We want all new cars to be, non-internal combustion engine, non-gasoline powered by 2035. And those are being mandated by the government. And so if we're going to reach those goals, or at least, those are goals by the U.S. government, right? And if we're going to reach those goals, we need a heck of a lot of lithium to power those electric vehicles that, are going to replace internal combustion engine. And so it's a big step in the direction of mitigating climate change, but also there's a real tangible cost to, extracting a mineral from the earth at the scale that it needs to be extracted in order to power, millions of Teslas or what have you. And so there's one deposit in southeastern Oregon that is, if you believe the mining company, is one of the largest deposits in North America. And so it represents this great opportunity for our country to have energy independence. But at the same time, there's a giant ecological cost to, not only to that area, but also to the communities living out there. And there's, a Native American tribe that lives, not too far from the mining site. There's a reservation of the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone tribes, and their story is also, part of what I'm pursuing with this documentary. And so it's really a story about trade-offs and kind of, I can say what I think the film's going to be, but right now it's still in an early stage. I've been filming it since spring of this year. Originally the film was mostly about the wildlife in that area, because that's where kind of my interests were. But now the film has, I've had this opportunity to connect with the community out there, and I've been given access to where I didn't think that was attainable. And, when I thought the film was just going to be a wildlife film. And so now it's become much more about sort of all the different stakeholders involved that would either want the lithium mine to go in or not want this mine to go in. And so the wildlife are just sort of a character or part of the film, and just a piece of that. And so particularly that one of the species I'm looking at are the sage grouse. And so I have some really wonderful footage of them in that area. And I think that will be a nice part of the film to sort of show the ecological cost of this lithium mine that's proposed out there. So yeah, that's kind of long way of, you can obviously tell that project's, even though, it's just dealing with an issue that's even more multifaceted and complex than the Butterfly film, even though that film has so much depth to it as well. So.
Sure, yeah, not to sell it short.
Yeah.
They both sound pretty complex. It's interesting to hear, though, how this lithium mine one is like, you entered, it sounds like, at one point of entry, focusing on like the wildlife, and then it just like once you're in the door, then you see all these other elements that are in there, and then it morphs, as you said.
Yeah.
How much of that is like a frustrating challenge versus exciting?
I think a lot of it has felt exciting because you're always moving forward. Like, I realize that there's a decent amount of stuff that I've captured already that I don't think is going to play, because at the time I captured it, I thought I was making a different film.
Sure.
But as long as I'm recognizing that throughout the process and have a clear vision of like where the film is now, I don't mind that stuff. I was talking to another filmmaker the other day, and he was saying we were talking about how many, how in documentaries, sometimes you just need to like be out there and be with your subjects or with whatever the film is about, and sort of pay your dues to the documentary gods, if you will. And like by just being out there, you will then like, and spending time both with your subjects, establishing relationships, and just connecting with different people that are circling around that subject matter, you will eventually be rewarded, I think, because the alternative is to sort of just formulate everything formulate everything before you even go out. That would be like the far, and then sort of try to control reality to fit within, whatever box you try to put it in on the front end. And a lot of great films are made that way. But in this case, I saw the opportunity to make this, expand the film, and I think I'm hoping that it's the right choice. You never know, because like this, if the film were just about sage grouse, I think I could have been near completion or almost done by now.
Oh, interesting.
But I think, seeing how I think that the film would be much harder to connect with audiences because it would just be about this species. Right. And, I'm not the BBC, and I'm not like, even though I'm really proud of the observational wildlife footage that I've captured, I don't have a helicopter soaring over the landscape and stuff like they do on those programs. And right. Like audiences today, in order to get them interested in wildlife, there's sort of a high bar set of like what you need to see in order to like follow a story that's about something that we can't anthropomorphize as much as like if we're just watching, human stories play out, right? Right. And so I think there's this opportunity to connect people even more to the sage grouse by not making them the focal point of the documentary, but by just having them be a piece of this world that I'm currently capturing, by really just investing people in the story through the human side. And then, I think a lot about how people connect with films and documentaries and stuff, and oftentimes it's just about that one person's story that they can relate to, right?
It's easier to connect with an individual versus a collective.
Right. Yeah. And so part of my process now is about finding those individuals, right, who are going to make up the film and really stand out. And there's definitely some people who have shown interest, and now I've identified as like, oh, okay, I see how that human story that person has is a much better way of setting the stage of how imperiled the wildlife would be in that area, versus like just doing some voiceover like David Attenborough and telling it myself over footage that I've captured of, these birds doing what they naturally do.
Right. You got a lot going on now, and you've kind of laid out like the progression of like your career path. I didn't hear any point in there where you like had to find some other form of employment working for someone or anything. Was that the case, or was there an odd job here and there that kind of pay some bills?
In terms of like a normal 9-to-5 or anything like that, no. I've just, since 2012, I've been freelance or like either freelance or running my own production company, and I've always stuck to just freelance labor, and never really had a need to get like a 9-to-5 or some type of salaried type work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome that it's worked for you. It clearly sounds like it's something that you enjoy. Like you've stayed in this sector.
There have been, I definitely, like, especially with like the 2 documentaries that I'm pursuing, those are the types of projects that I truly enjoy from a lot of different parts of the process. But there have been times where, I'm not been so excited about the career path that I'm on. And it just comes like, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but like the sort of discontent with like the commercial work that I was pursuing, and like, what does that mean for my impact on the world, right? Like, am I just going to go to the grave and it'll say like, produced like really great looking Hasbro commercials for like his whole career? Like, that just wasn't something I kind of envisioned for myself. And so there have been sort of times where I've struggled with that sort of bigger philosophical question about what is my purpose here on Earth, and sort of doing enough commercials. I kind of, would have low points where even though the work was good, I saw a bigger purpose for myself. And so there have been times where I thought like, what's the point of, having this unconventional lifestyle if I'm not enjoying it, right? So that's really the move now, and that I have the financial flexibility to do it, to pursue these projects that I really am passionate about, and use the skills that I've gained over the years to shed light on the important issues that I'm sort of interested in. And so those low points, you could probably ask my wife and she would tell you like all the sort of how many times I've regurgitated the same thing of like, oh, I don't want to work those jobs and this and that. And but I think it's all part of a process of learning as I go, and those like, even though maybe the output wasn't exactly what I wanted, I've learned so much over all the work I've done over the years that has informed how I work today and my ability to produce something that, I think is like worth watching. Right. So I think freelancing can be challenging at times because it's, you have to be very self-motivated, and not let yourself get too astray, especially when work isn't just lining up for you. But if you can find that thing, at least in my case, if I can find that thing that's that project or that idea that's going to get me out of bed every morning and want to like continually pursue it, then I can really be like productive and really excited about the work that I'm producing.
So I want to transition a little bit. Do you have any advice or just information to share to anyone who's considering going into a bossless path, that working for themselves or having their own company?
From my perspective, I think you don't have to be in this space of like working for yourself to be a millionaire. You can do it in order to pursue the things that you want to do. And that's why I enjoy it the most, because like, particularly on these projects that I'm working on, the 2 documentaries, I don't have anyone telling me what I need to film. And so I can focus on telling the story the way I want to tell it. And talking to the people that I want to talk to. And whereas, if I was on staff at a company, as an on-staff cinematographer or something like that, I'd just be getting, sort of different assignments and being told how and when to film those. And so even in my freelance work, it's partially like I get, direction, and I get told how to film certain things. But within that, pursuing this path, I get the opportunity to explore these side projects that, I get to shoot them the way I want to shoot them and explore them the way I want to explore them. And so, it's been a means to really have that autonomy, but not a means to make, gross amounts of money in that process. And that's okay. I think you don't have to pursue an entrepreneurial path to just be the richest man in the world and get on a yacht and kind of as the media sets it up to be. You can pursue the path to just be able to work the way you want to work and set things up the way you want to set them up. It's pretty challenging to just work on your own as an individual. And oftentimes if you can connect with a community, or in my case, I had a business partner, and we chose to start this company together, that can really be motivating to continue the work you're doing. And so I don't think it has to be just one individual, but for example, with my business partner, we set a schedule of saying hey, we're going to be in the office these times, and we're going to look for work if we don't have any work. And we're going to basically hold each other accountable. And that accountability, I think, is really important, because you lose that when you're not at a 9-to-5 job, and when you're on your own, you don't have that accountability.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. And I've gone through periods in my career where it's when you lose that accountability, when you lose that community, or anybody who's when you no longer have somebody asking you, hey, what are you up to? Or what's the next thing you're producing? You can sometimes get lost in oh, well, if I'm just pursuing my own project or whatever I'm shooting, does it really need to be done tomorrow? And you can easily push that off. But when you have other folks that you're connected with, then oftentimes that can really give you the motivation to continue pursuing that every day. And I think to broaden it out to just a bigger community, I think it doesn't have to be a business partner, but I know you've started this sort of creative meetup in this area where, creatives of all different types have come together and kind of just talk to each other. And I think something like that is really helpful to connect with. I've had that in various forms in the different cities I've lived in. And it really keeps you sort of grounded in your profession with all these other people who are doing what you're doing or something similar, and gives you that motivation and inspiration to keep working. To summarize, but partially just to kind of connect that to the bigger picture, you might be, a sole proprietor or whatever you want to call it, a business of just an individual, but that doesn't mean you have to just be self-made in the truest sense. You don't have to only rely on yourself. Businesses or just successful endeavors are collaborations, and connecting with other folks and relying on them is oftentimes the way you grow.
Right.
So I don't know, in our tech-filled world where we all seem to be more isolated by the day, I think it's easy to fall into a pit of just not being motivated, not doing much. But the more you can get yourself out of that and connect with other people, the better. I think for just even continuing whatever pursuit you're on. So,
yeah, that's some great advice. Do you want to share with viewers how they can get in touch with you if they're interested in seeing your work or potentially hiring you or anything like that? Where can they view or get in contact with you?
Sure. So you can see all of my work, most of it at least, on my website, which is just SeanCine.com, and sort of just highlight of projects there, and that I'm updating, pretty consistently, especially now that I'm working on these 2 documentaries. Don't have information on there quite yet about those 2 films, but in the next couple weeks, I plan to have a couple landing pages that basically share some stills from the films and can hopefully start to just put some feelers out there and get people exposed to the two films. So yeah, and then my business, the production company that I ran, the Vimeo channel is still active, so you can find those videos. There's a few of them are still on my website, but a lot of through that you can connect to my Vimeo channel and find all the documentaries that we produced.
All right, Sean, this has been great. I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on and chat with me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And there you have it. This has been a super fun conversation with Sean. If you want to hear more conversations like this one, then please follow and subscribe to the podcast. Until then, this has been the Bossless Path. Catch you next time.